Mariana
Didn't
Tome
realize
today.
that is necessary, but nobody knows Antoniya. She just organized this meeting and all the others before it with a bunch of amazing people. So I'm excited for us to hear the work from Oxford and the new developments on the screening test, the onset of labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm Mariana Tome for the purpose of this talk. Unfortunately, she got COVID, so she had to stay in Oxford, and she's really heartbroken. So Mariana is a clinical research fellow. She's almost a consultant in obstetrics. She joined my team about a year ago, part-time, and she's about to move to a full-time PhD from October. So I'm looking forward to it. So these are her slides, which I tweaked a little in 1 a.m. last night. So I'm going to skip through some of them because I have no idea what she had in mind. So I'm going to kind of present it with my touch. So this is kind of her project for her PhD. So it builds a lot on the previous work we heard from Amy as well, and the work I've been doing with the initial trace, which originated already in 2015, a lot through the discussions with Austin. And what now as well, Edwin Chandraharan and teams have been using in the UK as well as the Fit for Labour. So it's an expression that is increasingly common in the UK as well. So it's asking the right question in my view. At the onset of labour, is this baby fit enough to undergo that marathon? Right, so our data, just to build on Amy's talk before as well, is all high risk. I mean, sometimes people are put on the monitor because they can. So there is a mix. There will be some women who are low risk technically and just happen to be in the admission unit and so on. It happened to me with my first pregnancy as well. It was low risk. There was a monitor, someone said, let's put her on. It was great. But as a rule, the results, so I'm not going to show a lot of results because they are unpublished and because we're waiting for further validation and so on to get it all into one paper at the right time instead of having small incremental papers out. So I'm not going to show you major results. I'm going to talk to you more about what we're doing and where we are in terms of our dilemmas. So I apologize in advance that there will be a lot of yeah. So yeah, and some of the results we show are from Amy's work as well, which we're doing on. So yeah. So this is the systematic literature review that Amy did, which very much, pretty much what you were showing earlier, it's what Amy did. So that kind of table showing the clinical trials that looked at the admission trace. Of course, the admission test was looking into low-risk women as such. The definitions of how things were defined were very mixed. So there is a lot more detail that is kind of in preparation for a paper by Mariana on it as well, and Amy, obviously. So I think this would be my take on it, which very much resonates. So I'll go quicker through it. You know, some of the main challenges with these studies that were done with the low-risk women. Of course, they apply for the high. Who says we don't want to assess high-risk women at the onset of labor in triage and be able to? You know, why should admission trace be valid for low-risk pregnancies? How we assess the initial? How is that baby starting at the beginning of labor? Even if it's not low risk, it still matters about how we interpret that CTG later, how we triage them, whether we call the consultant, what we do with them. So I think the question of admission trace should be valid for low and risk pregnancies to begin with, because it's the right question. Is this baby okay? Is it able to go through labor? If we had a perfect test, there would be no question that we want to triage low-risk women as well, which the reason why CTG is not recommended for low-risk women in the UK is because of the very high false positive rate, because we don't want to do more harm by overdiagnosing. But in principle, if you have a test that it's not doesn't have a high false positive rate, there should be a test at the onset of labor for everyone. And that test should be definitely clinical risk factors, and this is what determines at the moment your risks. For example, what we saw with Mariana as well, was there diabetes, was there a prior stillbirth or other problem, all of these things that clinicians have guidelines at the moment to follow, right? So low risk versus high risk, you know, in these studies that were done, I think it's a big challenge as well, how they define their population. IMPI study, as we said, who I work with, and you know, he's brilliant, amazing. But still, you know, they started the trial, and then everyone who ended up with thick meconium was then excluded because was then high risk. Well, I mean, this kind of design of the clinical trial where you kind of post hoc exclude people, it's a questionable. Who are we testing when we are testing? before labor, onset of labor, after labor. We have no proper definition clinically of onset of labor for good reason, because there isn't. It's not one point of time that, oops, now you're in labor. So when you do this admission test or fit for labor test or whatever assessment you do, usually, typically, it's when the woman presents in the delivery ward or a triage with question for labor. That's the practical definition, and this is what our data reflects. So what we did, what Amy did, and what the fit for labor test is based on is this initial trace. And we have a good way to know where was she in terms of labor, how many hours before or after the clinically established onset of labor, which of course was, someone had to do an examination, find that it's 3 centimeters. You don't do examinations every 5 minutes anyway. So maybe she was in labor 2 hours earlier, but that's when she presented. That's when she was diagnosed in labor. So these are such a fluid definitions. So in our data, we know whether you were early, we know whether you are late compared to onset of labor. But taking that initial routinely collected data, I think it gives you so much more power than trying to define studies with artificial time points that would not be true tomorrow when you're using it in the real world. So these are all very important questions when you're just designing a randomized clinical trial for admission test or fit for labor test, or when you're doing retrospective analysis as you are. So there, you know, if it's a prospective clinical trial, how can you even begin thinking seriously about recruitment in labor? You know, we've done it in the UK because we are that brave. Quite a few times for this kind of CTG studies, but it's a big question mark in my personal view for a number of reasons, mostly because of the bias you would introduce by not recruiting the ones that appear really high risk with bleeding, and there's no time or mental capacity to talk to that one. So I'm very much against recruitment in labor personally. Then the other problem with the studies, so there's a lot of bias, right? So then the other problem with the studies was, well, how to interpret the CTG. So very much what Mari touched on, if 25% of your data is abnormal, what kind of test are you talking about as an admission test? It's completely wrong. 5% is still too high in my personal view, and I'll talk to you about it later. How you define abnormal? If it goes back to clinical guidelines, you know they are very different in different countries. Is it 160 baseline? Is it 150? Just start with that and there. So when you're doing this kind of studies and you come up with a clinical randomized trial and then say afterwards, oh, you know, it's not useful, you need to really kind of ask that question, how did they define abnormal? Did they do 20 minutes? Did they do an hour? Exactly for the same reasons you were talking about. And so, yeah, I don't want to bore you too much, but, you know, obviously the outcome, in all these things as well. So I'm not personally entirely about using the end of labor data as an outcome as well, because of that difference between admission test or fit for labor test and the time of severe compromise. If it's been 15 hours, how can you talk about linking that severe compromise to that admission trace? I'm a little bit more flexible about that, but you need to do it with understanding that there is this big timeline, and you can't just map one to the other, and so on. But you know, pH, low pH, if you're talking about fit for labor or admission test, low pH in the end of labor, I think it's completely irrelevant. You're not asking the question, is this baby going to become asymptotic? You're asking, is this baby already in some sort of trouble, which may be pH mediated or not? And we see how a lot of them didn't have actually low pH at all for these very sick emergency interventions. So pH is completely wrong in my view for this, and I can talk on and on about it. But what is the outcome that you care about? You obviously cannot do C-sections now on all of these people, so to see the outcome and to do that study and be able to immediately. So that's why it would be okay to use outcome at the end of labor with caveat. And the crushed C-section, so what I see as well is these crushed C-sections. You know, you would have a C-section at the end of labor, obviously, but in the second stage of labor or close to second stage, so much more dangerous to do a cut 1 section in the second stage of labor than a cut 2, as we call it, C-section. So within an hour, let's say, with time to prepare the, not to mention the impact for women and working people, it's crazy. You know, going from, oh, I'm laboring to, oh, general anesthesia, you know, you're going down, your baby's going to die. So all of this, you can, if you can move these crushed C-sections to a standard C-sections a lot earlier in labor, you're already doing huge, also not to mention the harm for babies. Anyways, so the potential harm to babies if you do a stage 2 C-section, where it's a lot more physically difficult to get the baby out because it's already descended in the canal. And then the false positive rate again. So, so what we have is this fit for labor test. Again, it's for high-risk pregnancies. At the moment, the data come from high-risk pregnancies, so we have no claims to try to use it on anyone who's low risk. We are not proposing, just disclaimer, we're not proposing putting it on low-risk women. In the UK, it's a very sensitive topic. Never, ever, ever would we suggest putting CTG on a low. No, it's important on low-risk women that don't have clinical indication for CTG as per current standard guideline. Between us and the YouTube viewers and the internet, obviously if we can get a test that is reliable with very low false positive rate, of course you should be one day testing it on low risk women, but only when you have a lot of evidence that it's a very low, tightly controlled false positive rate and potential benefit. And these things can be done with a lot of data. You don't need to necessarily run prospective studies like crazy without strong evidence from routine data. So it's a screening test at the onset of labor. It is 20 to 60 minutes, so it will run 20 minutes of CTG. It would combine with clinical risk factors such as the maternal age, gestation, diabetes, hypertension, things that we normally know to look for. Obviously, thick meconium is very important if you know it at the onset of labor. If you don't know it, it's really tricky. Is it a risk factor if you don't know about it? If the membranes are not ruptured, or if the thick meconium is somewhere high up and it's not coming out, can you assume there is no thick meconium? It's a bit tricky. But thick meconium is the strongest risk factor for us, always has been in my data, so it is important, and with caveat it needs to be included. So good things like this, so it combines the CTG matrix, and I think Daniel will talk tomorrow more about applying deep learning for this kind of initial traces, but even taking baselines and STVs, DC in my case, so PSA or decelerative capacity, it's quite good at capturing non-reactivity within that hour. So instead of just measuring STV, which could fluctuate a little bit, the DC is a little bit more reliable, decelerative capacity for me on our data in terms of non-reactivity, but it's still within the same concept, you know, where is the baseline, what's the STV, are they prolonged? So prolonged decels are, as Amy was talking, for our data quite important. But yeah, so things like these are going in it. We control it to alert at no more than 1% of high risk. So you know, obviously you can have a threshold and you move it around. But you know, I've looked at that domain, it's really at 1%. You do not want to alert in more than 1%. Obviously, that can change as well. But so we are able to detect more than 20% of severely compromised babies at that threshold of 1% screen positive rate. So you wouldn't have an alert more than 1% of the time, and you would be able to catch early about 20% of severely compromised babies as a composite outcome. Obviously, some of them are very ill already, so by doing a cesarean section on them at that point of time, you will still be having a damaged baby. So talking about these outcomes, you know, if your hard outcome is healthy baby versus non-healthy baby, you still might have non-healthy baby. The question is, you're saving that baby from all of the extra insults that would have been coming throughout labor. So yeah, this is based on 60,000 or 51 once we exclude certain things, and we do have about 40,000 ready that I'm playing with, but I'm storing them for validation mostly, and we're waiting for data from other hospitals to come in to produce. That's why we're not publishing already for a while, because we're looking into the independent validation that others will do, not us, because we want to, we're quite serious about introducing it in clinical care, and that's why it will be very important to do the independent validation, in particular with data sets that are not Oxford, because Oxford is diverse but not diverse enough to give confidence. So in terms of how it sits clinically, just time. So we have the dose Redmond. Obviously, we are privileged working in the same department, working quite closely with Chris Redmond, who initially trained me and hired me to. We are really looking at this interface. Where does dose Redmond stop? Where does fit for labor come? And then when does the full access come? So in particular with inductions, we are looking at it separately. So potentially you can have a different protocol for just labors, where at the moment dose Redmond is not validated or used previously any data from induction. So these are some things that we are internally between the two teams clarifying, when does one stop and when does the other start. It's in the UK, that's quite important for us because dose Redmond is the standard of care. So yeah, so what Mariana will be doing, and this is her slide now, so we got our permission to start using the Fit for Labor test on a small number of laboring people in the Oxford delivery ward from September. So Mariana will be doing that part. The idea here is not to collect data to show benefit, because obviously for clinical benefit we'll need tens of thousands, and more even for this one. But what we want to really, and I'll show another slide on it, what we really are exploring is making sure that it fits very well in the pathway in a way that each midwife would be happy to use it and want it. So we have a hierarchical system in the UK, so we have midwives. So when do they escalate? When do I call my more senior? What do I communicate to my mom? So really about the human factors and the soft side of communication issues and how it fits. Is it inside the room? Is it outside the room? Is it, do you have a gel? So at the moment it's on a tablet. It works wirelessly in our hospital, right? But it's like if your finger has a gel. So all of these kind of things of practical and technical issues that we want to have because we are not a company, we have the luxury to do changes every day. And Chris is hiding there behind Xavier. So Xavier and Chris from my team as well, they are able to do changes in the app in terms of software and design as we speak without going through a QMS or all of that. So I think we are very, very lucky. And that's one of the benefits of not being commercial for this time being. So yeah, so what Mariana will be doing is really kind of nailing it for Oxford, making sure that and it will take as long as it takes. It might take 2 months, it might take a year. As long as it takes until we feel that majority of people feel like, wow, I want it, I like it. And a lot of the work we are doing, so a lot of the work we are doing is around this core design of the actual interface. The algorithm and risk assessment is algorithm and risk assessment. That's with me mostly anyways. I'm improving it when I have time, which hasn't happened, but I will be improving it. There is more improvement to its accuracy to be gained with all of this extra data that I have. But so the algorithm is algorithm, but the core design of the app is something that takes a lot of our time at the moment, as well as the team. What do people want to see? And I'll show you different designs in a minute of how do you communicate that risk assessment, in particular around fit for labor, because it's a bit different during labor. But before labor and around the onset of labor, what do people need to see to have the confidence that they understand and it makes sense? And how do you communicate this with the working person and their family? How do you support that decision making, because especially the onset of labor is there. So very soft work around that. Another thing that it's taken that's relevant probably to more people is this how prescriptive it should the app be. It's surprising how long this is taking us, because in terms of data-driven software, you can build in the guideline within it based on data. So you can be, if your threshold is between here and here, this should be red alert, and this should mean, oh, you need to potentially consider rupturing membranes or calling your consultant or consider C-section. Obviously, we don't want software telling doctors to do C-section. That's very clear and loud at our end. No, that's not what midwives and doctors want. However, how far does your decision support software go in decision? Because what we can do, obviously, is just output a number. No problem, that's what CTG machines do. Up you go, and then leave it to all the clinicians in each separate hospital, try to come up with guidelines. Oh, if you think this and that, that's what we'll be doing. But the guideline can be inbuilt given that we have a lot of data. So where do we find this balance, and could you have a couple of interfaces as well? And that's what we're looking at more. So, you know, it could be light touch, but then if someone wants more of that guidance, should be able to click on a button and have more of that. But that's a surprisingly big one, and that informs the regulatory requirements as well, obviously. How much is the decision support and how much is AI? So that's taking, obviously as regulations keep on changing, in particular in the UK, that's something that we kind of wait and see. But yeah, and we are still increasingly, as I said, adding other risk factors and looking into improving the accuracy and making sure. So those are some snapshots of the current interface. This is the NHS, the National Health Service blue. So we've been advised to use the right blue, which Chris has done a good job in doing. So we're going for very simple design, right? And there are different buttons. So this will be changing, but this is what we do at the moment. These black dots are showing you the baseline every 5 minutes updated, right? And there's other things that keep on changing. Obviously, sinusoidal is important as well. But yeah, these black dots will not exist for long. My research midwife hates them, but it's not clear yet what they'll be changed. How do you communicate the risk? So I'll finish with this. I mean, this is an Everest plot. Those of you who know me longer know that I'm a bit obsessed with them because that tells me everything I need to know. This one is based on 60,000. It's a demonstration, by the way. Don't take that data seriously. It's a demonstration with the graph. But it can be calculating a risk for something, and you can define that. It could be the risk for C-section, it could be the risk for severe compromise, it could be the risk of something else, it could be the chance of spontaneous birth. So you don't need to be focused only on one outcome, it's data, you can have more into the way it would report eventually is your risk for this and that and that. Your risks for different things, not only for one, right? But if you look at the risk of something, and this is each dot is 1% of all your population data, and then your risk assessment individually would show you where you are falling. And this one is what Chris sent me this morning. It's obviously not working well because it's only 0. But so normally you will be somewhere on the spectrum, right? And you can see how close you are to the very high risk. But again, the guideline of what you do with that. So we are playing with this design. So this is clearly designed that midwives will not like or be able to use. That's what I know. And I hear a lot, it's too complex, it's too much. But it can be simplified. There's no reason, this is in my head, but then obviously that's why we work as a team. So Chris has added these notes now, looking good, well done. It's also very good as data collection. So when we use retrospective data or when we are collecting prospectively, you could add all these details and more. It's still work in progress. But for the data that we have retrospectively, that's available. So yeah. So I think Xavier wanted to show few designs of the risk 2 and ask you to maybe vote. And that's the last thing from us. So these are some designs that the team has been playing with. I haven't seen them. It's the first time I see them today. You just sent me a link 5 minutes ago. So I'm as surprised as you are. But yes, I think everyone's been designing different ways of communicating that risk. And I think we want to ask you to vote for your favorite. And is there like a prize? Whoever design wins? I don't know whose design is whose, so I will vote for the one that I think is best. And whoever wins will get something from me. Or if you want, you can ask questions while you wait.
All right, so let's use the chance at the time, please. Yeah, question there.
No chance to hear you. I'm sorry.
You are presenting fit for labor with screening. You're screening for labor. It's just a screening test. You're taking a universal set of patients, and they're all going to be subjected to this. How many of them are going to? Do you envision are going to fail the test?
1%, but you can change the threshold. So the results that I was talking about was about 1%. Is what my ambition is about 1%.
Okay, and they're all going to be delivered electively by cesarean section.
It's up for discussion. That's where the guideline element comes. So it's something that we are discussing as a team, and as we are bringing in more data. The way I am, I don't think it needs to be one or the other immediately. So what you can do is prompt thinking. So one of the things that we're looking into design is like, have you ruled out infection? So one thing is to escalate, right? So guide them. So if it's that 1%, and if you're a midwife, definitely call in your consultant. Again, we are very hierarchical in UK. So call in your consultant. Consultant decides whether to do C-section or not. And consultant decides together with the woman anyways, right?
Well, this goes to my
your software cannot tell them to C-section.
If someone passes the test and is still pregnant, about to enter labor, do you, from an ethical perspective, do we make a continuous clinical decision about whether this patient continues to be fit for labor?
Yeah.
So the thing you think that, or at this point you believe that what the parameters are for fit for labor apply for before labor and for the active phase of labor and the second stage of labor.
Yeah. And you can communicate a specific number for the risk, which is about 0.5 for those who are passing the test with green colors. But it's not a 0, right? And the majority of severe compromises would still be in that group. Of course, you continuously assess clinically as a doctor, but on top of that, ideally, you should have a system that, like an OXIS, that continuously monitors.
So I guess what I'm asking is if a patient comes in and she thinks she's in labor, or if it's a patient that her provider believes needs to be delivered with an induction, they pass the criteria. At any time that they don't pass the criteria, they have an intervention.
You cannot say that. Obviously, no one can claim
then
that.
Then what is the sense in doing the test?
So the sense is that the doctor decides together with the birthing person.
Well, all right.
what to do.
The team, all right? So,
In UK, it's more
so
and
the
more the working
doula,
person.
the doula, the midwife, the consultant,
I
and the
think if
patient,
it's a
and the
high
patient's
risk,
husband.
if it's a high risk, it should be escalated to the highest consultant level. So it wouldn't be the doula deciding. It would be, that's one of the ideas. If it's failing, then you need you need an expert to make a decision. But these are, remember how I showed, these are the guidelines. What do you do with that risk? Continues to be, I think, the most important question. So I don't have the answers.
Well, I think ultimately what you want to do is have fewer damage newborns without severely escalating
Absolutely.
Let's use the opportunity of the break to continue this interesting exchange. It's
There
important
was
that,
one question.
yeah, so we had a question even given.
Hi, just wanted, it's kind of a two-part question.
Loud.
A two-part question. Does the risk assessment incorporate a, thank you.
Sorry, does the risk assessment incorporate a prior, like a Bayesian prior, and does the risk assessment incorporate underlying assumptions about the prevalence within the given community?
Yes and no. So the risk assessment itself, no, because it's very simple. However, if you look at the Everest plot, that's where you put it on top of the prior. Because if you see, so that's where so it's artificially added in a clinical way. But it would be interesting to run some models and see if you can get anything better. But this is also a very good way to explain it. But that's where the prior comes. If you would agree.
I do, thank you.
So yeah, so if anyone wants to vote for the designs, that's the QR code, right? Let me do as well. And, thank you very much in advance.
And then you can see this is a design.
So the question is, how do we communicate that risk assessment? We've got a number, it's 0.8, whatever, it's 0.2, 0.04. How do we communicate that number in a meaningful way, clinically? So anyway, I think
it's a log scale on the x-axis is everything's log. It's a very good scale.
But this is some kind of minutes. So this is the risk over. What is the number one? I don't understand it.
That's the design she sent me yesterday.
I don't know who you're talking about. Sarah or Mariana?
Yes,
Sarah. But is that the risk?
yeah.
And what are the minutes?
Well, I guess 5 minutes before.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, guys. So I had fun. I don't fully understand it. So let's see. I think the other one is. So I think it's a risk. So yeah, if your risk is between 0 and 25. So the highest risk we always have, the highest risk we can ever have on the data is about 25%. So the highest, the babies that are most risky, stage 1 and 4, you actually don't have ever 100% or like even 80%. So your false positive rate for our data with this test currently is always some false positive. So you have 3 out of this 4 without severe compromise. But most of the time they'll then end up having a C-section or something. Okay, anyways.
Do you want to leave this up
Yeah.
for the lunchtime? That way perhaps more people will have time.
Well, there's the QR code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So